Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Susan Evans. I am thrilled to have the honor to welcome you today. Kensington is pleased to partner with the Library Foundation Los Angeles to present the Short Story Book Club curated by Susan Meinet. Today's guest author is Karen Russell. Kensington Senior Living has played a significant role in my life. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 10 years ago, and it was 5 years following that we made the very difficult decision to place him in a home. We chose Kensington Senior Living because of its dedication to memory care. Having my father at home with caregiver support was too hard on the family, and I did not want to lose both my parents to this dreadful disease. Kensington has taken exceptional care of not only my father, but my mother and I. I really cannot imagine this extremely difficult and challenging journey without the entire Kensington's team's support. Thank you, Kensington. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Sharon Padua. She is the Director of Major and Planned Gifts at the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, where she engages with library donors, volunteers, and community members to promote a meaningful philanthropic relationship with the library. Before joining the Library Foundation 5 years ago, Sharon held senior fundraising roles in several other nonprofit institutions, including the California Science Center and Children's Hospital Los Angeles. Sharon has a BA in English Literature from the University of California, Los Angeles, and an MPA from California State University, Northridge. Welcome, Sharon, and thank you again to the Library Foundation Los Angeles and Kensington Senior Living.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here today, and we're so grateful to be able to partner with Kensington on this program series. I also want to thank all of those who are joining us on this webinar today. And I also want to first take a moment to acknowledge my colleague, Jessica Strand, who is unfortunately unable to join us today. But as our public programs director at the Library Foundation, she has been absolutely instrumental in helping make this program series possible. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, the Library Foundation is a nonprofit organization that supports the Los Angeles Public Library by fundraising, advocacy, and creating innovative programs. If you are already a member of the Library Foundation, thank you so much. And if not, I hope you will consider learning more by visiting our website, lfla.org. As a member, you will help the library provide programs and resources that support children, teens, adults, and families with programs that include online tutoring, adult literacy classes, science workshops, and family story times. The Library Foundation produces its own cultural conversation series, Aloud, which features leading authors, artists, and thinkers. And to promote a love of reading and curiosity in all ages, we also partner with a range of organizations to create programs to reach new audiences. And today is an example of such a partnership. We are so delighted to partner with Kensington on this virtual book club series, which features award-winning authors discussing the art and craft of the short story. Now I have the great pleasure to introduce Susan Meinet, the curator of this program series. Susan is an award-winning novelist, short story writer, poet, playwright, and screenwriter. Her novels include Monkeys, Folly, Lust, and Other Stories, Rapture, and 30 Girls, as well as a poetry collection, Poems 4 a.m. Her novel, Evening, nominated for the LA Book Award, was a worldwide bestseller and became a major motion picture in 2007. She wrote the screenplay for Bernardo Bertolucci's Stealing Beauty in 1995. Her stories have received the O. Henry Award and have been included in many anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories. Her 8th book, a collection of stories, Why I Don't Write, was published last year in 2020. And in addition to her many literary talents, Susan also paints watercolors and makes collages. Thank you for being here all. And Susan, now I will turn the program over to you.
I'm trying to put it on and it's asking me, it says my hope. Okay, is that good? Are we on? Great. Thank you so much, Sharon, for that. And thank you, Susan, for getting Jessica Strand and I to organize this this series. I'm so happy to talk today to Karen Russell. I want to give you a little introduction to her work. Karen and I actually, we've met, I think maybe a couple of times, but it was really just in passing, in person. During the pandemic, we've actually had a chance to communicate really much more. One was a conversation we had about the short story, which we both write, and which was a really fabulous to talk to her. We were recommending stories that we liked, and the story that she recommended was one that I didn't know, by Alexander Heyman, called Islands, which I have since started teaching to my class. And as she mentioned, she didn't dare teach it because she loves it so much. She was scared that one of her students didn't like it. And I find my students both don't like it, and it's also their favorite story. So, such is the taste of art. Karen is the author of 4 books. And I'm just going to give you their titles because they're so great. Sleep Donation, Vampires in the Lemon Grove, which is a collection of short stories, Swamplandia, Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, and the book we'll be talking about a story from today, Orange World. Karen has received numerous awards, the 2002 and 2018 National Magazine Award for Fiction. Her Swamplandia was a finalist for Pulitzer Prize. She's won the New York Library Young Lions Award and MacArthur Genius Fellowship, a Guggenheim Award, New York Public Library Cullman Center Fellowship, and was at the American Academy in Berlin. So she's very accomplished. She used to be the endowed chair of Texas State University's MFA program teaching, and now she lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband, son, and daughter. In a recent review, just to introduce you a bit to her work, there was a review in the New York Times by the very good writer Emily St. John Mandel, and she summed up some of what Karen's work is like. She says, Russell's particular gift lies in taking themes that are close to universal and presenting them in stories whose strangeness comes to seem entirely natural, even necessary. Aside from their fantastical elements, and there are many fantastical elements in a Karen Russell story, these stories are united by Russell's willingness to engage deeply with darkness and her penchant for unexpected endings. This is no small things. In Orange World, she says, the strangeness is never forced, the surrealism always grounded in recognizable emotion and experience. And just reading again the story we're going to talk about today, Orange World, I was again, or even more taken with, people kind of focus on sort of the surreal aspect of Karen's stories and the darkness, because she isn't afraid to go to places. But I was more struck this time by her conveyance of sort of joy and love and brightness. So she covers quite a wide spectrum, and that's part of her greatness. So I'm very happy to introduce Karen Russell.
Thank you, Susan. I hope that wasn't too uncomfortable for people to see me dying of happiness in my Zoom square. It's like,
no, we're very happy to see people dying of happiness.
That's the way I want to go. It means so much to me coming from you. I won't belabor it, but it means the world to me coming from you. And I'm so happy to be part of this series. Very, very cool to get to talk about short stories with the great Susan in the middle of the day. It's just like an unlikely pleasure. And with the added bonus that I am avoiding nap time, which children, I really.
Your children are young. You have little ones.
Susan and I were talking about how people today use this phrase, I have to put my kids down. And, you know, speaking of the darkness, it just is like, could we come up with a better euphemism?
Yeah, that didn't used to be the way we put it. It's nap time, it used to be. Yeah.
It's much better than this weird veterinary parlance. You know, it's so I feel so lucky because you know, you and I and Amy and Elizabeth, who I know are part of this series too, all had books come out sort of in the same window. And I was thinking about the strange gestational life of a story in a book. I don't know if you run into this, but I do feel like, especially with short stories, there is maybe this like misperception that they can, like, you can bang one out in a weekend or something. And that is never, you know, I remember a friend of mine who said, oh, there are only 8 stories in this book. Doesn't 11 sound like a better number? And I was like, I'll be a skeleton. Like, I don't, you know, it's mysterious to me. No,
I think it's important that, you know, if we're ever talking about short story, it's like, you know, we don't need to remind ourselves of this, but the short story, I think just the fact that short is the thing that's describing it, it seems people just assume it's a lesser thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that long, and you can, it's not, you know, it's like when you were a kid and they'd say, how many pages did you write? You know, that most impressed.
Exactly. Right. And like and I think even within collections, I remember being frustrated. My second book, Vampires in the Lemon Grove, which admittedly has like a really goofy title, but you know, you wouldn't do this kind of work if it didn't matter deeply to you. And I remember that same sort of frustration of feeling like people took the longer stories more seriously than some of the shorter ones. Just that was all they were. You know, they were like the strongest stories are the longest ones, and it was sort of this unquestioned assumption almost. And I was like, gosh, it took so much work to get those short stories to live at that length, and to make something happen in this really. I mean, I think poets are the real magicians too in that way, because they can compass entire lifespans in, you know.
It's not an American sort of aesthetic to sort of make things smaller and more compact and that be admired. You know, there's the famous thing, Abraham Lincoln is always the one quoted, but I think you can even trace it back to Pascal, who, you know, Abraham Lincoln said, I was going to write you a short letter, but I didn't have the time.
Right.
So this is a longer letter I'm writing, you know. I mean, and your longer stories, because you do write, you know, we had Amy Hempel on last month, and her stories are, she writes novellas, longer stories too, but she also writes very, very short stories. And your stories generally a little, you know, we shouldn't even be doing this. We're trying to get people to stop talking about the length, I think, but they encompass often the terrain of a novel, which to me is so satisfying, because if you can, you know, why slog through all these pages if you can kind of get the same, you know, story and feeling in a shorter length of time. It's a beautiful thing, I think.
It is. A friend of mine, Kevin Brockmeyer, is a beautiful writer, and he just has a collection that came out with Ghost Variations that I can recommend to everybody.
Okay, good. That was one of my questions. So recommendations, yeah.
The Ghost Variations, and I asked him, you know, I think he went into it thinking this is going to be, I don't know what you know, like just a downhill ski of a joyride to write 100 one-page ghost stories. And then, I mean, it took him, I think it was a pretty brutal drafting process to keep reinventing this, you know, and I asked him what his takeaway was, you know, what were some of the lasting lessons? And he was like, well, now I read a novel and you know, or even a short story, they feel so bloated to me. You know, he said, I really feel.
That's what so it's 100 just one-page ghost stories.
And they're just
sounds like heaven. Yeah. Love that.
Beautiful.
I thought just before because people do a lot of talk about writing, but of course the writing is the thing. If you would just read a little so people can get a sample from the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it up. And thank you guys for reading it. It's been such a strange year, and you just sort of have to have faith, much in the Zoom room way, that the readers are out there, and I think, so this story sort of started in feverish fragments that I was writing when my son was very young, and I had this sense too, in a way that it hasn't.
When your son was young and you were, dare I say, breastfeeding?
I was, yes, and that was a real, not a straightforward road for us. I don't know how much information people need to have, but I think oftentimes with other work, Swamplandia was about adolescence. Really, I had a little bit of a lag between these experiences I was writing about. I had sort of processed them, and this is as close to an event I had myself experienced as I've ever written to, and that was different for me. I think usually there's, you metabolize things. I just feel like some Galapagos land tortoise, like just munching on a flower, and then maybe 100 years later, I'll deal with it fictionally. But this time,
maybe Karen, having a child breastfeeding on you is like the most surreal thing you had yet experienced. Like, you don't need to be surreal about that, really, right?
No, I couldn't really figure out a way to write about it until this devil showed up, I will say. I mean, I felt like I needed a much older vocabulary for some of these extreme feelings that I was having. And I'm so happy it read to you as playful and funny too, Susan, because I do think sometimes it's my own, I bear some responsibility for this, for like writing about women who breastfeed demons or men who grow tornadoes or whatever. People tend to focus on the premises. But I really think for me, it's just a vocabulary to talk about what is overwhelming and strange about this life. You could do it in a realist register too. I mean, it's the content for me is just sort of reality. It's not like it's if that makes sense. And I think sometimes when people ask me about my work, it will be in these binaries of like, well, this is obviously a fantasy, or they focus on the supernatural elements, and always just feel like that's a distortion to get at truth. And you're writing emotional realism anyway, hopefully, even if there's a devil running around.
That's right. I think, I think that the way people have to talk about things. Mm-hmm. I mean, I want to have faith in people that the way they talk about them isn't completely the way that they take them in. Yeah. I think you take in a story and you are feeling all the different registers in it. And then you finish it and you're like, wow, there was a devil in this, and so you sort of reduce it, right?
Yeah, I do. I that's the hope. Right, that you're making it up out of your own raw materials. So
that's right.
Hopefully it's summoning your own private Pandora's box of love and terror. But this is just a little bit from the beginning. Orange World. Abnormal result, high risk, clinical outcome unknown. At night, Ray pulls a pillow between her legs and lets the pain scissor at her. She feels like a gut-shot animal lying in the road. Ray was not raised with religion, so when she sees the blood in the toilet, she invents her own prayers. After the results from the third set of tests come back, she starts begging anything that might be listening to save her baby. And then, lo, something does answer. I can help you. It spoke without speaking, glowing low on the horizon. She had made it over the ledge of 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., what she'd once believed to be a safe hour, the out of the woods hour. What are you? The voice tipped out of the red light. That's the wrong question. What would you like me to do? Orange World, the new parents educator says, is where most of us live. She shows a slide, a smiling baby with a magenta birthmark hooping one eye. No, a burn mark. The slides jump back in time to the irreversible error. Here is the sleepy father holding a teapot. Orange World is a nest of tangled electrical cords and open drawers filled with steak knives. It is a baby's fat hand hovering over the blushing coils of a toaster oven. It's a crib purchased used. We all make certain compromises. We do things we know to be unsafe. You take a shower with your baby and suddenly, the educator knocks her fist on the table to mimic the gavel rap of an infant's skull on marble. Her voice lowers to a whisper to relate the final crime. You fall asleep together on the sofa. Only one of you wakes up. Don't fall asleep, Ray dutifully takes down. Orange World. They have already covered Green World, a fantasy realm of soft corners and infinite attention. I want to acknowledge that Green World is the ideal, but Orange World is where most of us live. So it's so funny to reread this. I feel like there is this way where I just toggle incessantly now between, like the stairs is like the land of future regrets, like your whole house becomes this potentially fatal playground. And then in 2018, like how naive does that sound? It's like all of these fiery fear hypotheticals are, it's just,
they're all just as real. I mean, that's what's interesting. That's why the title is so appropriate, I think, because these are worlds that you enter depending on where your focus is, and suddenly if you have children, you enter into another world where these things all mean different things, right? Yeah. And you just, in the story, just, I won't even say ante it up one more level, with the body being taken over by a physical, non-negotiable, thing, but that is what happens. You're saying what happens instead of it's okay, I can handle it. That's what we do in life, but that's not what wants to happen in literature.
So totally strange. Yeah, and I hope I think getting at how multivalent it is too. Where it's like I hope it reads as like a love comedy horror story. Like I hope all of that is present, because that is sort of how it felt. I mean, there's something also hilarious about, I also felt like I had gotten a decoder ring to my own body that it didn't come until this shift, where I was like, is that what these are for? I mean, in addition to, right? But just sort of, oh my God. And there's something that was so beautiful to be the answer to a question. I feel like I spent so much of my life unsure if what I'm doing is right, and just sort of, in that kind of calculus. And it was beautiful in this mammalian way to feel like this is deeply correct. I felt like, there's a loss that I hadn't really seen reflected many places too. When a pregnancy is over, you've given your child to the world. I don't know. And I think some of the responses that I got just personally, very unbelievably dismissive to me. Even like the idea of the baby blues, where I was like, this is so unbelievably condescending. The language around it.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I just recently read with my class a short story by Samantha Hunt, and it's called A Love Story. And it's about having it's the same thing about the body, a woman's body being taken over. And she goes, I mean, I made eyeballs, I made livers. I'm not quite sure why or how, but I did that. And then she, after she says to a friend of hers, like, why didn't you tell me that my personality would be like vanish when this happened? And the friend says, oh, I guess I forgot. And she goes, you did? And she's like, no, I guess I didn't forget. It's like, no one wants to pass on you don't want to undermine it, because you need a lot of, and as what happens in this story, it's this sort of female solidarity that she, that sort of helps her out of this dilemma of trying to literally, for people who haven't read the story, get rid of the devil that won't let her go.
I think that is sort of how it felt to me. And I also hope, even if you don't have kids, I'm sure every human being has been in some version of this bargaining room. Whatever your belief system is, I feel like I always am amazed at how sad my own auntie will be, in those situations where like, I'm not sure what table I'm even imagining, where I'm like, I never need to write another word if you just save so-and-so. And it's like, who would take that deal? As far as I know, none of these bargains have ever been taken up by any entity. I don't know. But I think there's something so natural about that fantasy of rescue, and I really had a difficult pregnancy, but then as it turned out, so many people had. I mean, I felt like one of the things that was so healing for me, just in the ways that stories can be very powerful, and they're such an antidote to the loneliness of being encased in the little kingdom of your skull, is I heard from many, many people who said, oh, what a difficult thing to carry, not just this baby, but like all of the dread that comes with love. And that, I think, was a real shock to me. And now when I read Orange World, I wrote some of these stories before I was when I thought I would maybe not have children, and I was single and just like, ping-ponging between jobs and continents. And it's funny, I don't know if you've had that experience. I can now sort of read a shadow story running through that whole collection where I think that people hear a love story and I don't know what they think. You can have this sort of saccharine Lifetime original movie idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's something totally obliterating about opening yourself up to that, right? And I think with the kids, it was a real education for me.
Well, I love, there's one point in the story, which is very, again, for people who haven't read the story, that the narrator, Ray, makes a bargain with the devil that as long as her child survives, she'll nurse him. And she goes out and nurses him in the gutter outside her house, looking at the sort of windows where she knows her baby's safe. Like somehow this is the sort of trade-off. Yeah. But instead of it being, and it's quite funny sometimes, the devil's, she can't quite tell what animal it is. And then it turns out it's not the devil, it's just a devil. And he sort of slowly loses his power the more that other people tell her about him, or this is what happens, and that's interesting. But there are times in the story where she says, I don't know if the house can contain all the joy that's felt in it, with the baby. So there's that going on too. We're not just getting a harrowing.
I'm so happy it reads that way, because it's true. It's I really, they're the same somehow to me, the love and the horror piece. I feel like
they are
comforting about I really, I'm a pretty short person, Susan. It's like just a lot to try to contain me. I don't know why sometimes I fantasize that if I was like a little taller, there would just be a little more real estate for the feelings,
No, I think that's just you. I think it's you.
Comfortable. But there was something like anonymous about this joy, and I still don't feel like I totally got at that quality, but I wanted to try anyway.
Yes, no, you definitely did, but also with the sort of feeling like you've just been, whoa, this thing happened, and you, even if, like you say, it felt so right, i.e. to have a child or whatever, and also you're so blindsided. And that's such an interesting phenomenon. I mean, one could say that extends to sort of life in general. This was so great, but wait, hang on, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that basically, like, thank goodness for writing, because I think this is a space where you can be honest in a way that I often feel incapable of being, just like under the name. And
That's right. Borges was saying how it's a place where you don't have to be polite. You
right,
don't have to say the right thing. You don't have to, you're just allowed to sort of explore what seems true.
right, right, which can
Yeah.
feel very threatening and, in sort of social
Yes,
spaces even. And I
that's
think
right.
part of
That's
it for
right.
me, it was like wanting to break the spell of this insane taboo I had internalized, where it was almost like if you were honest about the things you're fearing, like this, what a crazy, but I think having to sort of think through that, sort of like, well, if this is what you believe, what does that say about how you think reality is structured?
Yes. I mean, taboos are very interesting, and I think that might be something, I don't know, that's sort of a guiding principle in your mind, but a lot of your stories sort of address taboos in a way. They sort of turn them on their head. The man who finds a mummy in a bog in, is it Scotland or Ireland?
It is in like a fictional island that is like a Scotland, right? Like
Yeah,
someone
like a Scotland. And makes the mummy his girlfriend, and it's so against, like, no, we're not supposed to do anything to do with death, first of all.
Right. Certainly you don't want to like drag that thing around with you to school. Like I think there was something, but also so funny to me about that. I think often the things that scare me the most are the fun, thank goodness that you
You're
can.
also funny. There's an expression here I'm on an island in Maine right now, and they have an expression when something sort of bad happens, but there's this little side of it that's sort of funny. They say that it's tragical.
Tragical is so correct, right? And it's sort of like whatever distance from the canvas you are,
Right.
and trying to maneuver that. I feel like not to, I know the focus is sort of on Orange World, but I was thinking about with this story and with the novel too, I think there's so much pleasure for me in these sort of metaphysical pivots, setting up expectations and then sort of like swinging readers through a door, because that is often how I experience this strange realm. You think you're in one kind of story, and then your own expectations of a day or a life are subverted so radically so often. And I love that about your stories, that the pivot, and it's not everybody likes that, I don't think.
Right.
In a story, it happens so quickly,
Yes.
I think there's
No,
something.
I think that's what I love about stories.
Mhm.
You're just going along, and then suddenly it all looks different. I
It's
love
quite
that.
ruthless, right? If someone can engineer that. And
Yeah.
I think there's something exciting to me that readers do want that, or that humans do want to be surprised, because in a way that it's very humbling. You have to say, oh, I was wrong. So that appetite to be wrong is sort of interesting to me.
Yeah. Or to be, if you look at your children, don't they love it when they're startled, and then they laugh?
It's so
Like,
funny.
it's sort of this pleasure that you're being, I think film actually really operates on that, that sort of pivot, that surprise, this expectation, that sort of change, because I think in life, our expectations not met are sort of painful.
Very painful.
Right? So if we can make
experience
entertaining.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think it's true. And it's funny. And you laugh, you see sort of how, on some level, maybe that your own blinkered perceptions are just not adequate. Well, I mean, I've never felt that more strongly than this year, and you see all of these experts, and time and again, there are no, even the Cassandras, I think, are sort of surprised now that we're having some success. I mean, I think the surprise can work in both directions, but it is that jolt. And I think it's like you wake up a little bit out of the trance of your day or something.
Right. And that's always nice. That's always a nice thing that art does. Just, it can jolt you, maybe out of complacence, but it can jolt you toward pleasure. It can just sort of move you a little bit. I wanted to ask you about, this strange moment that we are in time. And if I know you also having children, which again is like it's like an eclipse. Suddenly the light's very different. And if you're working on something and how's the writing with both the children, primarily as a mother, but I know that the pandemic is, you know, very much in our face at the moment too.
It so is. You know, I finally, I feel like there was a long stretch where I just felt whatever happens when you're muted in the Zoom room was happening within myself, or, you know, like if the muse was just socially distancing from me, I don't know where she went. And I was mostly, you know, whatever was happening on the outside had like migrated inside of me. I think that is something else that is tough to talk about, but like, I love being with these kids, and the part of me that wants to disappear into imaginary world was really frustrated, you know, and I was scared, as embarrassing and ungrateful as that sounds, but I was a little scared that it wouldn't, I was lonely. I missed that other polyphony. And I love why I don't write really gets at just sort of how the crushing volume of just the everyday, and even calling it the everyday, like you don't,
Right.
I love that you make, I didn't know that, Susan, that you also do collages, because, but those juxtapositions can be so funny. We have to live in so many different registers all the time. And I think especially now where we're like implicated in this great global drama, and you know, there's so much suffering out there. And then I just speak to my own experience, which like is admitted, you know, it's incredibly, we're very privileged here. And still like the kids' needs are so unstoppable. And you know, so somehow holding all of it, right? Like sort of realizing, oh, now I live on the clock of this other life. That was the big surprise to me. And I don't think actually that I really deal with that in Orange World exactly, but just what time becomes when you have these abjectly dependent
Yes.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about Occupied, which is a story of Susan's that I just love. But you the way that like you're always living in these multiple time zones. And with little kids, maybe there's less permission to give yourself over to the past when it comes knocking. Or I don't know. I missed that a little bit. Like I really was not aware. One of the luxuries of the time before was that I did not realize it was a luxury, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah,
really
that's
thought,
right.
like, you know, I've always considered myself to be this insomniac, and I was like, oh, it's so miserable to be up in the night. And it is, but like being up in the night with kids, I don't know. It's just three's a crowd, man. Like I sort of I was like, oh, I didn't even know. What a weird thing to be nostalgic for. Just being up at night alone, you know, where you're not yoked to
That's so funny. Yeah.
To get, you know, it's like,
But I was thinking, particularly when we were reading this Samantha Hunt story, because she's a writer in it, and how I think that motherhood and writing kind of share the same demand for totality.
mm-hmm.
So it's a hard, you know, one of them is hard enough to just have because it's demanding a totality, so it's shoving a lot of things out, which as a writer, you know, one does in sort of not being quite like normal people in your in your habits, right? And then to sort of let motherhood, you know, move in on that, it's quite a
it's a real resource.
not a lot of room.
I think that's true. And I don't think I realized the extent to which a lot of my energy was, that you have to sort of change the flow of it. So I'm so happy for stories, because I do feel like there's a way where, and I think I'm just learning to write in this different way, which is interesting.
Are you? So you are writing?
I am writing, but it's in these like elliptical bursts. It's not, I don't know. It's just, I feel like I'm looking at the structure of my new brain when I look at the page, because there's like white space, you know, it's just, it's a different, like whatever fossils of thought are now emerging. I'm like, oh, this is like a different animal. How weird.
Yeah.
How weird to be alive to, it feels like Lamarckian evolution or something, you know, changing to meet your new circumstance. And
no, I think that's true, because you're not, one thing that I've kind of noticed about the pandemic, and this just has to do with the same thing about where your thoughts are occupied, is that, you know, one of the things that when we're in conversation with people, we're listening to them. And so yes, you got your little ticker tape going on in your mind, but it's not the same as when you're alone, right? Then the ticker tape is right up front and center, and that's all that's happening there. And in the pandemic, we have much less interruption of our thoughts and of being, and so it's putting things in a, you stay very much in your head, and that nice thing of people appearing and breaking up the iceberg that's in there or whatever is not happening so much. And it's
not happening so much, and you're not getting access to the other selves that only exist when you see.
that's right.
People, for sure. I've really been reading with this
Yeah.
veracity that reminds me of being, I mean, it's interesting too, the memory sets that are
That's so good. You're reading. A lot of people say, I haven't read, I haven't written. And so you've been reading a lot.
Voraciously. And when my son was first born, I remember reading in a way that I hadn't since I was like a teenager in my house in Miami, where honestly it felt like, and at that time I was reading, Frank Herbert's Dune, like as far away as I could get from my body and house in Miami. I was like, you know what? Like New Jersey's not going to cut it. I have to go to the Arrakis.
Yes.
And it's, I don't know how I would live. It's so funny to me. Sometimes I meet people who don't read. My sister-in-law, who I love, but she's just not a reader.
Yeah.
I don't even understand what would ventilate the box. I feel like I would die. I really feel that. That's not.
Yes. No, ventilate the box is very good.
Yeah.
We're going to keep talking, but I just wanted to say to people who are watching that we're going to take some questions at the end. And if you have a question for Karen, just put it in the Q&A and we'll get to it later. Just any of the things we've been talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's with that Orange World Demon. It's funny because I have been thinking recently, I'm excited now about this new project. And that can also feel like a strange succubus on your desktop, like it's really ravenous.
That's right.
Like, wow, you'll take as much as I want to give you.
That's right.
And it really feels like this bottomless hole where if I wanted to spend as much time as I wanted to pour in that direction, it would absorb. So that is
interesting.
I think, it is sort of a tricky balance. I feel so grateful also when a world opens up that you can travel to, but a book in progress.
Just back, I don't know the answer to this question. When did you first start to write? Like how did that sort of begin?
I feel like I'm just at pace with my reading life I always feel kind of embarrassed about that because I think also I didn't really believe you could make a living as a writer. My dream was just like read books and air conditioning. Like that seemed like what.
Well, I remember you not even thinking that books were written. They were just, that there was a moment when I suddenly realized, someone wrote this. Like,
yeah. And sometimes I'll do visits now to schools, which I always enjoy because I think if nothing else, they'll just see like a brunette lady in a sweater and they'll know that it's possible for them to.
That's exactly right. Like there is a person who maybe isn't quite as articulate as a book is that they can make a thing. Yeah.
I remember that as being actually a really gift of these author visits where I was just like, look, it's the human origin of this world I lived in. And it's
so when did you start sort of writing, thinking, I'm going to kind of, or not, I'm even going to do that? Because I never thought that either. It was just, when did it just start to sort of be a thing you did?
Yeah, I went to college. I went to, at first I wanted to be in the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern.
Okay, so that's writing.
And it was writing, but that felt to me like a vocation. And I was pretty bad at it. I feel like the kind of straightforward, subject, verb, object, like communicating information without the veneer of, your own consciousness. That was not my skill set as it turned out. I wrote like kind of hilariously, just like totally foliated by adverbs, not great newspaper articles.
Well, that's, as William Gaddis said, never trust a writer who isn't drunk on words when she starts out.
I do. I felt totally intoxicated, and I can still kind of fall down that rabbit hole to everyone's irritation, I think, where you're just trying to like scarlet or red with your jeweler's loop. Someone's like, who, let's, it's tax.
Move along here.
Like, but I took a creative writing class, and like I had never read stories. I don't know how. In high school, we did read Their Eyes Were Watching God and 100 Years of Solitude, kind of back to back. And I remember wandering through like the literal rain, just like slack-jawed. I mean, I really remember feeling completely haunted by both of these books in a beautiful way. But I didn't think like a human could make a book like that, like you're
right. Those are both very dreamlike books.
Oh gosh. Yeah, aren't they? And it was like standing under the cascade was just how it felt of language. And probably missing most of it, to be honest, at 17, but understanding that I was like witnessing real art, in a way that like my family, we didn't really go to art museums. We didn't like, I don't know, we spent a lot of time in the Everglades and also the Dayland Mall, and there wasn't really like the different kinds of culture, I guess. But it was books really where I felt like in contact, having the strangest intimacy with these other people's minds.
Do you remember some of the stories in that class you first read? That
I do, because I think they really imprinted on me. That's
why I'm asking.
One was Islands, and I thought that was like a perfect story. And I'm sure I've read that 100 times. We had Calvino, the dinosaurs from Cosmo Comics, Flannery O'Connor, A Good Man Is Hard to Find. So it was just one. I mean, I'm so grateful to this professor whose name I've even forgotten now, but this anthology he gave, Mary Gateskill.
Great contemporary writer.
Yeah, My First Goose, which I was like, oh, this is a war story unlike anything I've ever read. The things they carried in My First Goose were together. I remember that as being a very powerful juxtaposition. And then George Saunders, he's one of my favorite writers. And when I read him at 18, I was like, I don't think I like this. I don't understand what's happening. I think I just wasn't ready.
Very interesting point. Yeah, my students have that too. But you want to say, okay, just stick with it a little here, because you'll really be rewarded, And that's something I think that a short story can ask of a writer with more kind of kindness than a novel, because you don't want someone to have to stick with a novel for a long time if they're not gonna. But a short story, maybe it's a little hard, but if I really, give it some attention.
Right. Isn't that funny? I remember having kind of a similar reaction to poetry actually as George Saunders. And I think it was this feeling that I was not equal to what I wasn't getting the joke, or I wasn't on the
I think probably most people feel that way about poetry.
Which is a
shame. I feel scared. I don't get it. What's happening? And there should be a little apologia. What do you say at the beginning? Like, part of poetry is that you don't understand it all. That's part of what poetry is about. So that's good if you don't.
It's so good. I mean, I remember that was another wonderful part of my education. I was forced to take a poetry class. I didn't want to, because I had already foolishly decided that I didn't like poetry in college. And for that reason, because it was taught to me as if there was like a cadaver on a table and I had to somehow surgically remove its heart, for a test. And I just felt like a fool. I felt like there was some riddle or cone.
No, it's got such a bad rap,
Yeah. And then I think sort of stories I encounter this sometimes just with my family members sometimes, like even, where my wonderful uncle will be like, well, what are you really trying to say here? And there's that great Flannery O'Connor quote, right, where she's like, if you could paraphrase it, what would be the point of telling the story? If you could say it in a line, there would be no need for this story. You wouldn't have to move through the experience of it.
That's right. I'm looking at some of the Q&A questions, and one of them, it's sort of a bit what we're talking about here. She asks you, Karen, do you get any of your ideas and or images from your dreams?
Oh, my dreams are so boring. They're so repetitive.
They're never boring.
Oh,
Dreams are never boring.
It's true. And I was just actually thinking about this because, I don't want to embarrass Susan, but like one of my favorite stories in the new collection has a beautiful line. Look, I am going to embarrass you. You can ask me. You can get angry at me later. This is from While It Lasts. And I wrote it down and I was just hoping there'd be a reason to read it. And now you've given me one. Thank you.
Well, I do use dreams. I'll put it that way, but go ahead.
She'd been in a lovely, slow dream and did not want it to end. But once a person became aware of being in a dream, it was difficult to stay asleep. The thing that kept one asleep was not knowing that you were sleeping and not thinking. I was just thinking about the only, like, the happiest endings I can imagine also are just people marginally coming a little bit more awake. They're never, it's like just like incrementally more awake. But that can be so painful too. There's a Joy Williams line I love where she says, this little girl discovers she could have thoughts and not think them. Her mom is dying and she wants them to get matching tattoos. And the girl says, there was something wrong with this, but I was too exhausted to figure out what. I feel that way sometimes. My dreams, my most recent dream, it was just like a nice house guest doing all the dishes. They're so like, what a sad.
But it's funny because someone would think that your stories are very like dreams. So someone's saying, talk about your use of surrealism and what it means to you as a writer. Because some people think surrealism and dreams are kind of hand in hand.
Yes.
Another question.
I really think, something about the shift in lighting, like to have some dream. I really do think also like there's a logic to dreams that we all recognize intuitively, even if, it starts to fall apart. If you're describing a dream to someone, they can kind of tune out, right? Because they don't understand the ligature, maybe they didn't experience as you did. So it can sound kind of random, but I feel like maybe the dream comes out of some stew of uncertainty or randomness, but dreams have their own kinds of plots and juxtapositions. And I really love them because it feels like such an honest communication that a body can have with itself.
Yeah.
And it's totally unmediated in some way. And when writing is going well, which for me, this happens really too rarely. I wish it happened more. But when you're really kind of surrendered to something, I feel like it can feel a little bit like dreaming on the page because you're not I don't know, you're hyper vigilant. I'm sure if they put a writer's mind in an MRI scanner or something, there's probably a different part of you that you're channeling at least some of the time. And I think the worst things I've written, it's usually because I am hyper aware of what I want to do or what I think I'm doing. And the stories that please me, or even the sentences that make me the happiest, it's like I didn't know one clause to the next what was going to show up on the paper. And in that way,
No, well, I would say, and everyone gets, I think writers often say, I didn't even know this was going to happen. It makes it seem like you're just writing in. It's not quite that. There is a connection. You know what you're doing, but you didn't plan it ahead.
Mhm.
That's the thing. You're very in the moment when you make some of the decisions. But it wasn't the plan.
Right. It wasn't sort of the connect the dots,
No, it's what you're finding there, in the sentence.
The act of writing. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think that is sometimes a misconception I think people might have, right? That you sort of plot it all out and then you execute. It's
That's
like,
right.
no.
Well, because every once in a while there's some writers that talk that they say that's how they do it. And you're just like,
I can't imagine that, right?
There was a recent article about Kazuo Ichiguro, our great Nobel Prize winning writer, and he doesn't write a lot. He doesn't feel compelled to write like all the time, but when suddenly he feels something coming up, he will go and sort of manically work, but he will work out where it's all going to go, what the world is, what the terrain is, before he actually writes the exact proper story, right?
Oh, that's
So crazy. I mean, I think I'd do that, but just in process.
yeah.
I don't do
Yeah.
one and then the other. I do that, and that's what the finding is
Yes.
the whole
And
time.
it's tough to say. I mean, I find this part tricky to talk about with students sometimes, why something's not quite working. You know, sometimes I'll get even editorial feedback. And it's like the diagnosis might be correct, but you have to figure out your own, you have to mix the medicine for the story. Like no one can really tell you
That's right.
to fix what's not there. And I remember with Orange Road, like something felt wrong about this ending. So so this is a story. This woman makes a deal with the devil, who turns out to be kind of a huckster, to protect her baby. And I think the pivot in this that was very pleasurable for me was, you know, you think that she's having a hallucination, or you're reading some woman's kind of private, you know, kind of a transposition of her private battle to external reality. And then it's like all these ladies at the neighborhood commune are like, oh, that devil's coming around. You know, everyone's familiar with it. And there was something so exciting to me about getting to that. And then I was like, well, this will be good. There'll be sort of a shaky sisterhood, and hopefully it's funny, and they're gonna, you know, they're gonna battle this thing together. And then they do indeed, not to spoil the story, but they do indeed have like a provisional, probably not permanent victory over it. I mean, I'm sure that guy will be back around in a week, you know, but it's
Very interesting. They go free at 200 miles away instead of.
yeah. I sort of feel like I'm in the way that, you know, hope is just a continuous negotiation with the future. You
Yes.
probably can't get rid of that guy forever and ever.
Right.
He seems pretty persistent to me. But then I was like, why doesn't this feel like the ending? It didn't at all. And I'm sure some readers will still not feel totally satisfied. But I was so happy that this other ending opened up, but it really surprised me. And
with the mother.
yeah, that really, I don't know. That was one of my
So
favorite.
was she not, was the mother of the nursing, not narrator, but
Yeah.
heroine of the
Yeah.
story, is looking after her mother and is not there with her and would be, and they're very close and they speak on the phone. And was she there in the story the whole time? That's why she wasn't nearby, or?
That was one of those surprising, you know, in the way that stories are so iterative. So I'm sure there was some first draft where that mother didn't play any role, and then
Yeah.
quietly, in a way that I'm not even sure
Yes.
readers would consciously attend to, but that became part of the scaffolding for me that was very important. I don't know, that like,
Well, of course, it's the mother. She's a mother, and she's got a mother. She's having a mother, and she's who's looking after, you know.
yeah, I
But
think,
that's where the subconscious knows the things to write,
yeah,
and but it's also where you as a reader, in the drafts and in looking over what you do, and I think this is something that a lot of people who don't write aren't always aware of, because writers don't reiterate it all the time either, is that you have to look at this material for a long time
yeah,
and go over it and fix the words and decide what's going to be there and not. That takes a long time. And that's where the writer in you realize, oh, turns out that came in because it's an important sort of
this is
structural thing to hang it on.
absolutely. I felt like, oh, here's this human geometry undergirding this whole drama, and
That's
really that
right.
made me so happy. I was like, this really can't end until she sort of steps into this love that, you know, now she's on this side of the equation. And
That's right.
simple, visceral way. I mean, that was my experience anyway, too. Where it's like, oh, this is what they felt for me. I get it now.
Right. And you can't, you know, you couldn't have planned that out in writing this story, right? You can only plan out kind of the situation, and here are the things that happen, and then you start thinking, okay, and so what's happening here? You know, that's why in that, and I tell this to my students a lot, that often it's in that last kind of 10% of writing a story that you realize, aha, now I'm making it into a story that's going to sort of work in some way, right?
Isn't that, and it's what a faith game, because it is like the last 10%.
Yes.
Such a weird valley of the shadow where it's sort
Yeah.
of like, maybe I'm just shoveling leaves into a bag. I really don't, it's hard. And I think it's sort of trusting that there's something, some
Mhm.
sub-audible force. Yeah, I love that idea that maybe your subconscious, like something in you, there's something that wants to be born. So you just make yourself available and hope that it can like.
Right. But then you're available, but you need to, you need to stick with it. And that's another thing. I mean, I was going to ask you, what, if you could give just one of the little, kernels to writers, I think that's one of it. Stick with it longer than you think, now it's getting all confusing. I can't. That's the time to sort of stick with it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Stick with it, even when it's sort of your initial ambitions have now become like a little more diffuse.
That's right. Or it's become tangled, or actually you thought it was going to be that, and it's sort of this. It's like you put a lot of time and thought into it. So you're further along than, than you sometimes realize. I just want to mention one comment in the Q&As. We were talking about that the mothers take the devil off 200 miles away and let it go like a, what's it? Save a pet?
Like one of those, right? I read that somewhere, that if you have bats, you have to really drive far outside the radius of your house. They're
but
like,
instead of killing them, a raccoon, you like, and
like to have a heart.
One of our have a heart, exactly. And one of our listeners says they can't kill them because they're all mothers.
Oh yeah, it's hard. Well, it's sad when anything dies now too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
We're running into some. I thought I'd have a little more time on this, but my son is asking all the hard questions. He's 4, and like, couldn't we just ask me about like where donuts come from? We have to go right to the abyss,
What's the sky? Yeah. No, they know. Children know the good questions to answer. They just get sort of battered out of them as time goes on. That's why they're great. I see Susan bringing us to a close here. So great to talk to you, Karen. I'm going to let Susan sort of end us out.
Please don't leave, ladies. This has been such a treat, such a joy, so inspiring, such a great natural conversation between you two that our audience is blessed to have joined us today. And I can't thank you two enough. It's inspiring. So thank you so much for being with us today and just so naturally having a great, very enjoyable, enlightening conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the foundation of the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. I want to get their name right, and to Kensington. It's really great.
Yes, thank you, Kensington.
And please, and I'm looking at comments right now from people saying this was fabulous. Thank you so much. So thank you. I will reiterate that, and we hope that everyone will join us on May 19th with Susan Meinet once again with her guest author Elizabeth Strout. So take care, be safe, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Susan. See you guys hopefully soon in Dimensions.
Yes.
Thanks all for coming.
My pleasure. You take care.